All right, let's talk about type in Adobe Photoshop. First thing, let's go up to the Window workspace. Make sure we're in the Essentials default. And let's open up the Character panel. And that will open up the Character and Paragraph panel. So both of these we're going to be using when we're working with typography. The Type tool is one of Photoshop's vector tools, and it's located about 2/3 of the way down in the tool panel. There are 4 varieties: the horizontal type tool, vertical type mask tool, and horizontal type mask tool. We're going to be focusing on the horizontal type tool first. Simply click, and that will create a new type layer, and it will give you placeholder text called lorem ipsum. That is the placeholder text used in the United States. It is intended to resemble the look of English. All right, let's take a look at the Characters panel. The first thing I want to do is increase the size of my type so I can see it better. So I'm just going to do that over here where right now mine says 12 point. I'm going to increase that to 24. Now let's go up a little bit higher than that. I'll go up all the way to 60. And maybe I'll zoom in a little bit here so you can see it better. Now the top windows here show you the font and the weight or the style of the font. I tend to use the terms font and typeface interchangeably. If you have the Characters panel open and you click on this downward arrow, you can go through this using your up or down arrows on your keypad, and you can go through all the different fonts that you have loaded and see what your type is going to look like in that font. This is very powerful because it's really important to choose a font with the right attitude, the right personality for the piece you're working on. And this lets you see it right away. I really like this feature a lot. Okay, that's Avenir. Avenir happens to be one of my favorites. I'm going to just stick with Avenir for a moment. Now over here we could choose, Avenir has lots of different styles. I could use black, for example, or light. And frequently, if you're doing a movie poster or an ad or something, you want to choose a font, a typeface family that has a large variety of different styles, different weights, so that you can mix and match them. It's generally considered best practices to use only 2 fonts, at the most 3 fonts, in a single document. But if you use a font that has multiple weights, you can mix and match those without any problem. And so having contrast in your piece is always a good idea. Contrast stimulates the brain and makes things more interesting. So mixing, for example, we could do light and then heavy or black. And let's close up this space between. So you could do this for a person's name, for example. If this was for a movie poster, I could do this first one as, let's say, Tom, and then the rest of this would be Cruise. So it's just kind of a stylized way of handling somebody's name. All right, so let's delete Tom Cruise, and I'm going to take my type tool and create another placeholder text. I'm now back in my default of Myriad Pro, regular, and at 12 point. Now I want to look at some of the other features in here that we can modify to change our type. This first window is for the size of the type, so it's by default it's in points. Hover your cursor over the T and then you can just scrub and you can increase the size of the type. Let's hit return. Let's go ahead and hit return and add a second line of type, and this can be anything that you want. I'm just going to add some random letters in here because I just want to show you this window here, which is leading. So right now it's on auto. So auto is usually the point size plus 1 or 2. Let's do it manually. So I'm going to go in here and I'll just set it to 60. And then we can use the Option key and the up or down arrows to modify it. So this is called leading, sometimes called line spacing. Directly below the leading, we have tracking. Tracking is for multiple characters. So right now I've got all of my types selected, and I could scrub here to increase the tracking. So that's the space between characters. If you want to modify the space between just two characters, that's called kerning. And very often that is something we need to do when we are working with English. For example, let's say we made this all uppercase, and I can make this all uppercase by clicking on the third button down here in the character panel, the TT, so that will make it all uppercase. Let me move this all over a little bit. You can probably see that there appears to be more space between some characters than others. For example, to me, the I and the P look a little bit farther apart than, say, the R and the E. So we may want to close that up a little bit. That would be under kerning. That's this one right here. This does not become available until you click between just two characters. You can either go with one of the presets, or you could use your option and your left and right arrow to decrease or increase that spacing. So let's say I'm happy with this. I release the option, hit the right arrow, and then I can modify this space, and so forth. So you can fine-tune very easily your headlines. And you almost always need to do this to headline type in English. Below the kerning and the tracking are the horizontal and vertical scales. It is considered best practice not to distort your type either vertically or horizontally, but instead, if you need a condensed type or an extended type, it's best to choose a font that's been designed that way. By using the vertical and the horizontal scales, you could end up with type that looks a little bit distorted. So for example, let me select it. If I do this, it starts looking strange, and it's pretty obvious to anybody who's looked at type very much that this has been horizontally scaled. So it would be much better to choose a font such as a Helvetica condensed. So here's a Helvetica condensed bold. I don't have a condensed medium loaded at the moment, but it does have a different appearance than just simply scaling the type. There may be exceptions to this rule. There may be times when you have to scale either horizontally or vertically for some reason. Now, if you're using effects on your type, you probably want to avoid the faux bold and the faux italic. They can kind of mess with your effects. But it's perfectly fine to use the all uppercase, the all caps, or the small caps, the superscript and the subscript, and so forth. This one up here, this is baseline shift. And so with this one, for example, I could move lorem up. And again, you can drag these. So maybe I want it to be at the top of the L instead. I'll Command R, bring down a guide. Let me zoom in a little bit. And then we could scrub this to make it align perfectly with the top of the L. Maybe I'll close up that kerning a little bit. This works sometimes for title treatments or for logos. Sometimes you want to do this. But you do want to put it back to 0 as soon as you're done with the particular, because this will remain in place until you change it. So that means any type that you create after this will also have a baseline shift of -100. So you want to put it back to 0 as soon as you're done making the adjustments. I'm going to delete that line of type and create a new line of text here, and we get the lorem ipsum. It's highlighted by default, and you can just start typing and it will replace the lorem ipsum. I'm just going to type in some random gobbledygook here, hit return, type some more, return, blah, blah, blah. Let's make the font bigger. So I could come up here and increase it, or I could use the key command, which is Command Shift and then the greater than bracket. Less than bracket will make it smaller. I can hold the Option key and decrease the leading. I'll move it over here to the center. My line of type is a little bit long, so maybe I'll break it about here. Bring this one back up. Make my words a little bit shorter. English doesn't have words that are this long, generally. Now, right now this is aligned left, ragged right. And that is established by my paragraph panel right over here. Here we would have aligned right, ragged left. And you want to be careful if you do this, you want to take out this space that the return gave us. If I wanted to, I could center it by clicking on the Align Center. I'll select them all, Align Center, like that. And generally with a centered type, you want to have a nice variety of shorter, longer, shorter, and so forth. You don't want a type that is very similar in line length. Now, if you want type that is justified, that means it is aligned both left and right, you need to create a text box or an area of text, and I'll delete this one for now. And then to do that, you simply click and drag with your type tool, and that creates an area of text. That defines an area of type, keeps it within a container, and now you could use the justified buttons in the paragraph panel to create justified type. With your type tool, you can open or close the text box. Justified type can be really nice graphically, but it can also look really weird. As you can see in this case, we've got some odd spaces between words, and some words have way too much spacing between letters, so way too much tracking. So it usually takes some time to finesse the type. Ideally, you'd be able to edit it, edit the words to get type that looks much nicer. So for example, in this case, if I made this word, if I had a shorter word in here, then it gets bumped up to the next line. And you need to choose when you do justified, if you want the last line. Generally the last line, or often the last line in a paragraph, is shorter than the other lines. So this first option would make that last line align left. This one would center it, align right. This would force that last line to be justified, which often looks a little strange. With the paragraphs panel, you can also do things like this in here, like you could indent the margins. So this would force it all away from the edge of that box. This one would do the first line. And these two are for space before or after a paragraph. So if I created a new paragraph by hitting an extra return in here, then we could use this one to increase the space between the paragraph. And this one would be for space after. So I'll just highlight this last line and then increase that number, and we can increase the space after. Now a lot of times, if we have punctuation, I'll stick in some periods in here. Punctuation will make the justified type look less clean because for example, this case of the period allows a larger gap, so it doesn't appear to line up as well as the other type. So what you can do is you can go into this drop-down menu right here, and you can say hang punctuation, Roman hang punctuation, and that will take any punctuation and put it outside the alignment of the other type. So it's going to look cleaner. So that's what that's for. You can modify the justification and the hyphenation in here. You can set up parameters to determine how much space is allowed, for example, for word spacing and so forth. So this will help you clean up your justified type. And the next one down, usually with justified, when you're actually dealing with English and you're justifying type, you almost have to use hyphenation. But then I would combine it with the hang punctuation so that the hyphens themselves would be outside the line of alignment. Now there's one more thing that I want to show you. I'm going to get rid of this one and let me put in a headline type. So I'll just type in the word headline and I'll go back to my Avenir. Bold. I want something that's really heavy for this, so I guess black would be the heaviest, and I'll increase the size, something like this. Now I want to show you how you can use layer clipping masks to make it appear that there is an image inside your typography. So I'm going to place an image. I'll place an embedded image, and I am going to just bring this out so it covers my type. Normally I don't like to scale up type, but this is going to just be for a demonstration. So now I will turn this layer, the sunset layer, into a layer clipping mask. You can press Command Option G, or you could go from your drop-down menu, create clipping mask, and voila. Right now it appears that this sunset type is inside my headline. So that can be a lot of fun to play with. In another tutorial, we'll look at adding layer styles to our type to create a three-dimensional quality.